Hello everybody and welcome to Nathan on Shuffle and to a very special episode here. This is what I'm considering my quarter one of 2024 roundup for prog releases. All throughout the year I'm always listening for great new prog music that I want to bring to you guys to let you know about. It's one of the most exciting things that I'm able to do on the channel, so this is a way to kind of collect all these different albums that I've been listening to and give you guys the best ones that I think are worthy of your time and attention. And I'm kind of planning to approach this a little bit differently moving forward. I kind of wanted to clear out the albums that I have in my queue at the moment before moving forward with a little bit of a different approach. Not wildly different. For most of you, it won't feel any different than anything I've done on the channel thus far. But I want to put out more shorter recommendation episodes where I recommend a new album that I've been listening to that I'm excited about. And I don't have to do a full in-depth review. I can just do a video that's like 1 or 2 minutes long, just giving you an idea and impression of what the album's all about, if you might be interested in it, and turning it over to you to go check it out if you want to. Basically, the idea is a lot of times these more independent, smaller releases end up getting relegated to video later in the year. I compile it all together with like 20 different albums, and I feel like a lot of these albums get lost in the shuffle, or I talk about them months later when they're not as relevant anymore, and a lot of my other contemporaries have already discussed it, and a lot of you have already discovered it in different ways. So I feel like it's a lot better to get the jump on it, to talk about it as soon as they're released, and to give you guys a chance to go out and check out these new albums as they come out. And if I do a short recommendation show and decide a few weeks later that I want to do a more in-depth review of the same album, then I can do so. You know, there's no problem with that either. So the idea is just to basically talk about as many albums as possible, recommend all the good ones to you guys that I'm coming across and excited about. And hopefully you guys appreciate that if you're here for new music. And if not, you can skip forward and move to different videos, but I think it should be a lot of fun. So that's the idea moving forward. But for today's video, I'm going to talk briefly about the albums that I have covered on the channel that I've done spotlighted reviews for, and then get into 16 other albums that I think are worth your time and attention, and do a brief little like 1 to 2 minute review of each one. So I'm going to try to keep this as short and concise as possible, but I know I end up getting more long-winded than I expected, so we'll see how it goes. But basically every quarter I try to come up with about 25 albums that I think are worthy of talking about and giving some attention towards. And then of course collecting all those from the year, that means that's about 100 albums covered on the channel, which I think is a really good goal to have, just to showcase how much great music there is, that I can come up with 100 really good new prog and prog related releases. And some of these won't be full on prog, it's mostly just releases that interested me, that I want to share with you, but I think people who appreciate more complex music and proggy stuff will come to enjoy it as well. So the albums that I've covered on the channel already, I've covered 9 albums. I was hoping to cover 10 over the course of these first 3 months, but the Cruise to the Edge vacation kind of superseded that and made it so I wasn't able to put out as many reviews as I had hoped. But the albums that I've covered over the course of these first few months are Neal Morse's The Restoration, Joseph Part 2. Incredible second part to his double concept album series featuring Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat, essentially. Really great stuff, really surprised me with how good it was. Caligula's Horse, their album Charcoal Grace, fantastic modern progressive metal that I think really was a fantastically composed record. Kairos' Mannequin, which I thought was an incredible slice of like prog, synth pop feel, a little bit of Frost vibe, but maybe leaning heavier into this 80s pop aesthetic. It's just a wonderful, fun, catchy record that I can't recommend enough. Steve Hackett's The Circus and the Night Whale as well. A brilliant record from Steve Hackett, one of my favorite of the solo releases I've heard from him. It's a bit of a concept record and goes in a lot of different styles and directions, but stays grounded in his typical Genesis type style and eclectic nature that he's been known for over the past several years in his solo records. I covered The Pineapple Thieves, It Leads to This. A bit of a quieter record, a bit of a shorter record, focused more on just really solid songcraft and great production. I thought it was a really great release. Big Big Trains, The Likes of Us, which to me is a triumph of the band. This is them embracing their new singer and kind of entering into a new chapter, and I thought they did it in glorious fashion. Anyone who loves classic symphonic prog has got to check that one out. Dirt Poor Robin's Firebird, a little bit off the beaten path compared to some of the more proggier releases here, but a lot to love from this art pop duo. Theatrical, cinematic, wonderful songcraft, some great melodies, beautiful performances. It's just a wonderful record that I can't get enough of, an addictive listen. Almo's Reconciliation, which is a bit heavier and harder than I usually go, but I really enjoyed this debut release from a fantastic new talent that takes cues from Between the Buried and Me and Haken and even Devin Townsend to create a really satisfying journey of progressive metal. And then Professor Caffeine and Insecurities, their self-titled record, which really brings this more indie prog aesthetic, emo indie rock, but done with some really cool prog flourishes. Think Coheed and Thank You Scientists, and maybe even a dash of Deer Hunter, and you've got a really fascinating stew of music that I just couldn't get enough of this quarter. But now into the 16 albums that I want to recommend. Of course, that's 9 albums, so 9 plus 16 gives you 25 great albums to check out in this quarter. So I'm going to go through that list right now, albums that I haven't covered yet, but that I loved this quarter. The first one, in alphabetical order, by the way, this is Albion and the album Lake Songs of Ilbid. And this is a really fascinating record to me because it was billed as a progressive metal album, but I don't find it to be very heavy in the metal vein. I consider it more of a folk album with a bit of a metal touch to it. There's a bit of an orchestral metal type vibe in the background of this, but mostly it's just really pleasant prog folk music along the lines of like Jethro Tull. In fact, the main guy of Albion is Joe Parrish James, who has been with the current Jethro Tull lineup. I think he just recently left Jethro Tull, but fantastic vocals, beautiful folky elements, with a little touchstone of progressive metal, a la, Ayreon and their folkier moments from their big records like The Human Equation. Just a wonderful, beautiful listen of a record that I strongly recommend. Some instrumental stuff like the Arthurian Overture, some really leaning into folk elements like Barrett's Privateers. Just a beautiful record, maybe a bit overly long, perhaps is the only criticism I can levy towards it, but pleasant all the way throughout, so how can you complain when you have more of great music in store? Number 2 on my list is the Aristocrats and their album Duck. This is a purely instrumental album from 3 master musicians in the scene. Guthrie Govan on guitar, Brian Beller on bass, and Marco Miniman on drums, of course. A bit of a concept album, loosely, because it's all instrumental, so it's hard to decipher what the true story is, but they talk about, a little tongue-in-cheek, about a mysterious duck who flees from his native Antarctica for New York City, pursued for unspecified reasons by a penguin policeman, where considerable misadventure and danger await, is basically the concept here, but really it's just an excuse for these guys to play incredible, wonderful instrumental rock music with prog flourishes, with some fusion undertones, and it's just a really fun blast of a record that leaves you impressed with these musicians' abilities and their ability to have fun and have joy in the music. That's what I appreciate. Sometimes instrumental albums can strike me a little bit boring, but they bring so much playfulness and fun into the equation that it's always a joy to listen to and keeps you excited and interested from the last minute of the record. So a brilliant triumph of an album, a great release from 3 fantastic musicians. Next, this one really surprised me, Cloud People and their album Simulacra. This is very different from my typical thing. It's mostly instrumental as well. There's actually quite a bit of instrumental albums on this list. This is more in like a synthwave direction, but has some prog undertones and flourishes. This is a 6-piece group from Norway. And their vibe is they're trying to fuse kind of the energy and improvisational nature of jazz and rock with this tight, understated elegance of electronic music is how they explain it. And I think that's pretty apt. There's definitely some like 80s synth type stuff going on, like almost this 80s action movie soundtrack kind of vibe. A lot of sci-fi elements, especially in the track listing and in some of the like spoken word kind of passages. You can catch little elements of a story at play here. But mostly it's just really well played music that has that electronic synthwave element, but also some really cool prog influences at the same time, and it just really captivated me. I like the jazziness. There's some saxophone that accents a lot of this music that is played really well, and so I just really found myself enjoying it from the start to the end. It's just a really cool layered album with a lot of different musical undertones that I just found a lot to enjoy. Number 4, maybe more in the traditional symphonic prog space. This is Emerald City Council and the album Motion Carries. This is American progressive rock band formed in 2021 out of a recording project produced by saxophonist keyboardist Brent Bristow. The singer here is Jake Livgren, who of course has sung on a lot of Neil Morse related releases and is related to Kerry Livgren, of course, who's a notable figure in the prog world. So this is just really great, commercial progressive rock, so to speak. I don't know if commercial is the right word, but it's very accessible. I should have said accessible progressive rock, where it has really easy to grasp melodies and it's really pleasant to listen to. Nothing too crazy, nothing too avant-garde or strange here. It's very much in line with what you might hear from Neil Morse-led projects, definitely taking its cue from that. But I also hear a lot of like an AOR kind of style to it, like you'd expect from Toto or some of the stuff from Kansas, but really expertly played. There's some great saxophone melodies throughout here, some incredible singing from Jake Livgren, who's a great vocalist. There's a 20-minute epic to dig your teeth into called Platforms of Illusion, and it's just a really fun listen if you like this style prog, if you like some of the playful, accessible nature of like Neil Morse-led projects. I think this is right up your alley. So a really fun release that I enjoyed that came out earlier in the year. Moving off the beaten path from some of the more traditional prog, Everything Everything and their album Mountainhead is next. This is a band I unabashedly love, and I certainly not squarely in the progressive rock world. This is much more indie pop, but really interesting indie pop. It's artistic in nature. There's always like concepts behind a lot of these records that they're putting out. I like their previous record, Raw Data Feel, which I thought was a really great exploration into their indie pop vibes with a bit more of an 80s synth pop touchstone. This album kind of continues to develop that, but maybe has a bit more layers and more complexity to it than their previous did. But it's just glorious, really greatly composed synth pop with a little bit of a complex edge to it. It has an interesting concept to it that's a bit of a critique on society at large, as many modern concepts tend to be. But it's just a really great, layered, colorful, idiosyncratic, and shockingly catchy product that might be one of their best albums to date. I really love it. They're a bit quirky, so it could be hard to get into. I know Jonathan Higgs is the vocalist, and his voice can be a little bit of a barrier to entry. He has a very unique style and sound to his voice, but if you get past that, it's just some really great, expertly played music of the modern pop variety, but with a little bit more of an edge. I really loved their album Man Alive is what brought me into the group, which made me feel like it was a more modern, poppier, Gentle Giant type sound is how I thought of them back then, and they continue to carry that torch forward, so I really appreciate their music. But yeah, it's definitely more pop-centric, so if you're opposed to modern pop, you might want to skip that one. Something a bit off the beaten path once again is Glass Beach and their album Plastic Death. This is a super complex, interesting, a layered album that pulls in many different styles and is hard to really describe. It has a little bit of that emo indie rock kind of flavor, but you've also got a lot of different like jazzy undertones. You've got some progressive rock elements. You could call them math rock. You could call them post rock. But there's no real one defining genre that really captures what they're doing. They're a younger group. They're based out of LA. And they're just really creative in how they compose this music, and it just winds and weaves through so many different things going on in the mix. I just think it's a really, really clever album and something interesting if you want more of a modern indie approach to your prog. Has a bit of that like post-punk kind of vibe as like Black Midi and those types of bands. Black Country New Road, but I feel like it's a not as harsh, not as angular, not as difficult to approach for me. It had a bit more of an accessibility that pulled me in deeper, but then uncovers a lot of layers of hidden complexity beneath the surface. So it was a really exciting, interesting listen, and I had to mention it. Another album that really impressed me this year that's definitely not at all in the prog rock camp is The Last Dinner Party and their album Prelude to Ecstasy. This is a British indie rock band from London. I've heard a lot of I haven't delved too deep into this, but I've heard some people talk about this group that it was kind of assembled by the music industry. So a lot of people argue if this is like an organically produced band or if it's just kind of a product of someone trying to assemble together the perfect modern pop indie rock band. But regardless, the music is incredible. It sounds awesome. It really delves into this more Baroque pop kind of aesthetic back in the 70s and 80s. Think Kate Bush primarily, but Roxy Music, ABBA, Queen, Florence and the Machine, all of these great pop artists that are able to add a lot of artistic integrity to their music and have a lot of complex layers, even amongst a very poppy aesthetic. And I think they do this fantastically well, just like those bands do. So if you like that kind of pop music, you like ABBA, you like Kate Bush and those types of artists, a dash of Queen, a dash of Roxy Music, and bands like that, then you may find something to really appreciate here. Just a great conglomerate of great female artists coming together to produce a really pleasant sounding album that has a lot to enjoy. My next album here is Mesa Verde and their album All Is Well. This is a Norwegian group that once again isn't easy to pigeonhole. I've heard it described as the love child of Yes, 80s King Crimson, and XTC, brewing up a very colorful prog rock storm here. I think this is really great material. I've enjoyed this quite immensely. I haven't heard many people talking about this record, but I think it's really clever how they do it. It's not traditional progressive rock by any stretch. There's a lot of really cool, funky elements. The bass lines are really catchy. There's a bit of a pop indie aesthetic as well to this one, but they definitely have some influences back in 70s and 80s prog as well, bringing this fascinating stew of music once again that's hard to pigeonhole and hard to really decide what it is and how to explain it. But it's somewhere between modern prog, atmospheric indie rock, melancholy art pop, maybe even some jazz thrown in for good measure. It's a short album, so it's an easy listen through. It may not be for you if you're not into some of those more AOR pop kind of elements, but I think it's a really fantastic listen, and I have continued to like it more and more as I keep listening to it. So definitely some cool elements at play for that album. Number 9 is Monkey 3 and their album Welcome to the Machine, instrumental psychedelic rock from Switzerland. Very hypnotic, very atmospheric at times, but then also brings the heaviness and crunch and almost metal sound at other times to make for a very diverse record that has definite ties to classic Pink Floyd. There's no escaping, especially with the album called Welcome to the Machine, there's no escaping that this is largely an homage to Pink Floyd, but kind of brought into the modern era. With a lot more heaviness and some of that heavy modern stoner rock kind of vibes to it. But there's a lot of cool, lengthy instrumental pieces that take you through these space rock landscapes. Definitely at times you're reminded of Pink Floyd and okay, this is very reminiscent of this Pink Floyd track, this bit from Animals, this bit from Wish You Were Here, whatever. But then they always bring their own unique stamp to it and their own unique heaviness and energy. So it's a great balance to me of paying homage to the 70s classics, but also bringing it into a more modern, harder type of aesthetic as well. And it's just a fantastic record all the way through. Very enjoyable, very listenable. and plays these elements perfectly. So definitely a high recommendation. This one has been on repeat over here for me, certainly. And also in a similar vein, in this kind of stoner psyche kind of realm, is Mr. Bison and Echoes from the Universe. This comes from Tuscany, Italy, and it's a really cool. Think bands like Elder, like King Buffalo. It's definitely in that realm. I even find some connection with the Von Herzen brothers, which I really love as well, that take this like classic rock style, but bring it into a modern edge with this kind of stoner psych aesthetic on top of it. And it's very heavy and psychedelic, but brings it into a modern age. And it's a great record that just sounds really fantastic. It's one of their strongest records, showcases some extended cool instrumental stuff, but also some great vocal work, some catchy melodies, but all grounded by that like modern stoner rock with some bluesy vibes to it as well. Really love this. I like their blend and their style, and I think it makes for a really satisfying listen. So definitely check this one out if you like that blend of this like stoner rock movement, like Elder and King Buffalo. Has a bit of ambience and atmospheric moments, but a lot of crunch and heaviness at the same time. Takes some elements from 70s prog rock, maybe some krautrock as well, to just give a really great stew of music that sounds like it could be plucked out of the 70s, but also has some modern touchstones at the same time. So number 11, this was a late edition, but I wanted to put some focus on Night Verses. Their album Every Sound Has a Color in the Valley of Night. Part 1 was actually released last year, I believe around like November time frame. So they've released part 2 now in March, just a couple weeks ago. And so now it's kind of a complete record. You got part 1 and part 2 to create this really incredible double album. And they're mostly instrumental group that plays some heavy prog metal stuff. Think Opeth, think Tool, those types of groups. There's some really heavy moments on this side, but I think part 2 is not quite as heavy as part 1. It's a bit more laid back, a bit more allowing room for different types of sounds to come into the mix. But there's definitely some heavier moments also. One of the highlights for me was actually the album that features Brandon Boyd from Incubus called Glitching Prisms. I think this is a fantastic track, one of my favorites this year, and definitely well worth a listen. But the whole record is just really cool. Them merging this like prog, alt metal, post rock, ambient type sounds, but there's moments of really crushing heaviness. There's moments that are lighter and more ambient, but it's always grounded with great melodies and great sounds. Definitely something to go check out, something that I really have grown accustomed to and really love. Another album that I absolutely adore is Plantoid's Terrapath. This is a new group based in the UK, I believe. A quirky style to them as well, more in that modern indie rock vein. Touch of psychedelia with jazz and indie rock, math rock, a little bit of post-punk in the mix. Once again, they kind of are in the same lane as like Black Midi and Black Country New Road, but I think they bring a bit more of an accessibility, a bit more of a jazzy flavor, a bit more of that psychedelic touch, leaning a bit more into the 70s influences, which are all things that are appealing to my ears. Great female vocals from Chloe Coyne, and just fantastic guitar work, great drums and bass, laying the foundations. Like I said, some really great quirky, jazzy undertones to some of this. The first track feels like it could be inspired by perhaps some Pink Floyd as well. But when they get going, they really have some great grooves and some great melodies. You can't help but bop your head to some of these great songs. And it's a short record. It's 40 minutes. It's the perfect length. It's a great showcase for a new young talent. And I'm excited to see where they move forward from here. Just really cool, eclectic prog that showcases a young band on the rise. And I can't recommend it heartily enough. It's one of my favorite records of the year, certainly. Topiary Creatures and the Metaphysical Tech Support Hotline is next. This is a group based out of Nashville, Tennessee. They describe their sound as maximalist punk rock. So you get a bit of that punky sound, emo, but they put in a lot of like progressive undertones as well to make it stand out amongst the punk scene. And I really appreciated what they did here. The track titles are really unique and funny, showing they have a clever sense of humor. Trader Joe's Frosted Mini Wheats, God is a Scared Kid at a Middle School Science Fair. Those are some of the titles to some of the songs. There's like dual vocals by female and male vocals, so you get a cool diversity of sound there as well. And it's just interesting to hear this blend of this like punk early 2000s kind of style, but blended with progressive rock. And I thought this was fascinating, and it was a fun listen that I recommend if you're interested in something a little bit different, something a bit more modern sounding than your classic progressive rock. I thought there was a lot of fun to be had on this record. Next, we have a couple of like more traditional progressive metal projects that I just absolutely adore. These are both albums that probably deserved a longer, more extended review, and maybe I will do that in the future. The first is Triton Project and Messenger's Quest. This is the brainchild, apparently, of Tampawat Sutapong from Thailand. Sorry if I butchered that name. He's a master keyboardist that's all over this record, and he brings in Sean Thompson, who's someone I recognize from the band Odd Logic. He also had a project called Nothing in Writing recently, who brings vocals, lyrics, and guitars to the table. We've got Kieran Pope on bass, and guest Oliver Allard brings violin on a track. But this is just your classic prog metal, you know, in the vein of Symphony X, Dream Theater, all of those stalwarts. It's a really long, sprawling album. There's only 5 tracks. 2 of them go above the 20-minute mark, Beyond the Mazes and Lighthouse of the World. You could argue that this album's probably a bit overlong, and it's really a lot to get through and to wrap your mind around, but once you start to unravel it, it just is so cool and has so many great musical moments. I love this prog metal style. It's right in my alley, right in my lane. And there's a lot of cool little quirky moments that bring a diversity of style and spirit to this, similar to like what Haken do, where they're able to just all of a sudden morph into a different thing, a jazzy interlude here, a bit of a Gentle Giant type section there, and they're able to make it all work fantastically well in their whole aesthetic. And I think Triton Project has a little bit of that in their mix. There's some more Latin sounding sections, and I think Tampawat brings a lot of that Thailand, like more Asian sound influence to the project as well, that brings a diversity of sound to the storyline here. And I believe it's a concept album, so you definitely get some conceptual pieces here, overarching storyline throughout the record, but it's all grounded by this really classic 90s, early 2000s progressive metal style, like classic Symphony X and Dream Theater from those years. But with a little bit of that Haken-y quirk coming in from a more modern era. So I think there's a lot to enjoy here. Definitely one I want to keep diving into because it's so lengthy and there's so much layers and depth to this. It takes a while to uncover all of the mysteries and all of the cool idiosyncrasies to the music, but when you unravel it, it's well worth the experience. So definitely one worth recommending. Another one that I had on my schedule to review, but just wasn't able to find the time for it, and I may do a longer review in the near future. This is Turbulence and their album Binary Dream. This is a Lebanese progressive metal group that definitely has some cues from Dream Theater, but also Haken and some of the more modern progressive metal bands. I really love this group. They really impressed me with their previous album called Frontal, which I really heartily recommend. It was one of my favorite albums of the last few years. And this new album just follows in the same lane. It's very well-played, technical progressive metal. There's a couple of instrumentals that showcase their chops and their willingness to go into these quirky moments, like I was mentioning with the Triton Project. You know, they have that Haken-type energy where they're able to go into the more quirky type instrumental sections, but then they have an incredible singer who grounds the more sung pieces. There's a great epic length track, the title track, Binary Dream. Once again, it's a bit of a concept album, tells the tale of a robot at the center of an experiment called binary dreaming. The saga results in the android entity achieving self-awareness and becoming sentient, a possible warning of the worries of the rampant development of artificial intelligence technology sweeping the planet in the 21st century. So very relevant to our modern era, but a little bit leaning on the progressive metal influences of the past, and it creates a really incredible modern progressive metal album that I think is well worth anyone's attention who's a fan of progressive metal. Definitely something to really sink your teeth into. And then this is the newest thing that I've discovered, and I almost considered doing my first shorter recommendation video with this one, but I'm putting it in here as number 16 of the quarter. This is Wombat Supernova, and the album is called Ape Woman vs. Turbo. And this is just really expertly crafted math rock that has some progressive elements, that has that quirky genre hopping type style, similar to a Haken. It's all instrumental. It's just two people playing all this music, a duo who are they're from France, and they just have a playful, quirky spirit about them. There's a video that they have out of their track Bertrand, which is just an absolute blast. And this has been one of my favorite new discoveries. They have a lot of cool tracks that give you a lot of different genres in a small punch. Like Double Cringe is one of the tracks that goes from country to jazz to blast beats. You get Eggs, the track that has a bit of that circus music vibe to it that sometimes modern progressive metal bands get into. So I really appreciated this all the way around. If you want something that's just a blast to listen to, that's fun, that's quirky, that has a different style, I think this is well worth a listen. It's a fairly short album, but it has a lot of fun surprises that I think would fascinate a lot of listeners who are into this math rock, complex instrumental rock style. So those are the releases that I have from this year so far. I also was going to talk about Vicinity and their album 8, but just barely didn't make the cut. Another great classic prog metal album that sounds like a cross between Seventh Wonder and Circus Maximus and classic 90s Dream Theater. A really great modern prog album there. A couple of cool EPs came out. Universe Effects, The Distance is a really great EP in that prog metal vein, definitely taking cues from Dream Theater and Rush. Artificial Language came out with a EP called Distant Glow, which I feel brings a bit of a more modern spin, like a Haken or a Leprous, but also incredible prog metal stuff. So there's lots to enjoy from this quarter that I really fell in love with. I think it's been really strong and has shown a lot of really unique and clever releases that I wouldn't typically have listened to, but my friends have recommended them to me, and I've really found a lot to enjoy, and hopefully you guys appreciate the recommendations as well. So that's my show for today. I know I've already gone over time of what I wanted to do here, but hopefully it's well worth it if you're interested in some of these albums and want to check them out. So thank you guys so much for joining me, and as always, enjoy the music, everybody. Bye!